Hi guys, so for today we will be discussing about the strongmen in the Philippines. So the strongman is kind of questionable because ano, it's we're not really 100% sure pa if all of them can be classified as strongmen because some have certain qualities, but it's still up to debate whether or not they are actually strongmen. So to start, let us first look let us first watch a bit of a story about the myth of Malakas and Maganda, which was used by the Marcoses during their time. Uh, sorry. So as you can see, it's here na Malakas and Maganda, the art of deception, because their integration of themselves with the myth of Malakas and Maganda was a form of deception. So let's watch this by Dr. Roland Tolentino.
Signed Proclamation number 1081, placing the entire Philippines under martial law.
Yung mitolohiya ay nagpapahiwatig ng collective unconscious natin. So yung alamat ni Malakas at ni Maganda ay origin myth ng pagkabansa natin. Ibig sabihin sa panahon ng katutubo, ganito nila pinaniniwalaan kung paano nagkaroon ng unang tao at unang mga nilalang sa bayan natin. At maganda dito sa mito na to ay gender neutral. Ibig sabihin, hindi mo alam kung sino si Malakas, kung ano gender or sex ni Malakas at ni Maganda dahil pwede naman sabihin na malakas itong babae or maganda siyang lalaki. So, ibig sabihin, hanggang sa na-illustration sa nagkaroon ng visual representation at doon pumasok yung co-optation ng mga Marcoses sa myth na to kasi makikita ka talaga commissioned murals na kung saan ay nag-split yung kawayan at si Marcos ay kahit medyo matanda na siya nung panahon na to ay batang-bata, viril at masculine ang itsura at si Imelda naman ay overtly feminine na klase. At maraming mga commission artworks katulad yung kay Imelda mural sa Heart Center or yung kung saan ay nobilidad naman sila na yung pamilya nakabarong sila or na may mga medalyon na parang monarchy ang sistema sa Pilipinas or yung isang kanila na ultra-feminine si Imelda na painting na kung saan ay may payong siyang hawak at balingkinitan ang kanyang pangangatawan. So bahagi ito ng myth-making na ginawa ng mga Marcoses at precisely ginawa yun noong 1972 na kung saan maraming mga intellectuals ang kino-op para nga magkaroon ng bagong klaseng pananaw, i-reinvent ang kanilang origin. Halimbawa. So, nung panahon ng 1972, upon the declaration of martial law, ay maraming mga historians at mga poets at mga writers ang kino-opt din ng mga Marcos para nga mag-orchestrate ng kanyang myth-making production dito sa bagong rehimen ay tinatatag niya at kailangan niya kasi i-validate kasi illegitimate itong rehimen na to dahil dapat nagtapos na yung term niya yung second term niya noong 1972 ay illegitimate ito, kaya kailangan niyang gawin siyang lehitimo. At ginawa niya ito sa isa-isang paraan ay yun niyang orchestration ng mga intellectuals. So may mga epics na nakasulat na ginagamit or dinadambana ang kabayanihan ng mga Marcoses at pinanggalingan nila na commissioned lang naman. O yung Antadhana series na pag-rewrite ng kasaysayan ng Pilipinas sa iba't ibang volumes sa mga historians from UP at iba pa ang gumawa nito. O mga libro ng poetry na paying homage or odes sa mga Marcoses.
So, yon. So, basically, Dr. Tolentino explained na yung kung ano yung behind the Malakas at Maganda commission painting. Kasi ito yung replica na siya ng oil painting discovered in Malacanang Palace. Ito si si Ferdinand Marcos na sinasymbolize niya yung si Malakas kuno, and in their ruling he was basically trying to embody yung patriarch na yun nga malakas, being strong and capable enough to lead, which was kinda kahit too much na, and being abusive, which basta as strong as disciplined yung tao and to keep order in the family. Parang ganun yung gusto niya i-embody na, and parang ginagawa niya rin naman noon. Although yun nga, medyo naging abusive na, since I think we all know na ang dami ring killings na nangyari nung time ng martial law for in the name of quote and quote peace and order. Tapos I can't see. Wait, I can't see. I'll show. Ito naman si Imelda no, na ine-embody naman yung pagiging mother or maganda, because ang ano naman niya is parang siya naman yung pag nag-care and nagdodot, kasi diba like sa binary opposition ng father and mother, parang ang father is like all about keeping the kids in check, while the mother is more concerned about parang nurturing growth, yung giving love and such, and sa kanya. So parang mas more on yung softness siya. If Ferdinand was more on the strictness, parang etong isa si Imelda was more on the soft-ish na actually, pero ang ano naman sa kanya is more on sa art and pagiging excessive na, like yung term nga na Imeldific ay nagawa because of her na sobrang excessive niya, and it's one of the few Filipino words that were adapted in English na yung pagiging Imeldific is pagiging excessive, which is actually true din, kasi nung time nila si Imelda yung parang more on concern sa arts part ng paggagawa ng legacy nila, like yung cultural center of the Philippines, etc. And like San Juanico Bridge na parang more on siya yung nag-lead nun, and sobrang parang yung iba doon mapapaisip ka na, is it really necessary for that to be built? Kasi parang yun nga, parang excessive na siya. It's not practical. It's more on parang just for the sake of leaving a legacy, ganon. Para mas naging ganon yung focus niya. And more on sa arts nga siya. And I can remember what was the name of it. I think it's Manila Theater. Yung may issue na parang sinumpa raw yung firstborn nila na like si Amy Marcos, na dahil daw parang nirush masyado yung pagtatapos nung building na yon. Ang nangyari raw is yung mga construction workers ay parang nahulog sa yung sa cement na
it collapsed and they just built over the bodies.
Yeah, yun. So parang it's haunted, and ilang beses na over history, I read somewhere na ilang beses na parang tinry i-revive yon, but like it would always eventually fail. And recently lang, I think I heard or I read somewhere na parang tinatry na naman nila na i-revive yun, pero well, good luck. And then tas yun pala, yung parang pinaka nag-emphasize din ito nung parang malakas at maganda nila na yung myth is yung sa film na Iginuhit ng Tadhana, which starred someone named Gonzales as Ferdinand and Gloria Romero, which I'm not that familiar with the male lead, pero kay Gloria Romero, I think most of us still know her as one of the parang beautiful actresses, ganun talaga, like over time. And especially, it was during her prime na from Sampaguita Films yung film na yun na itinadhana, ganun.
Moving on, we're going to the Kingmaker.
Which is actually the show about the Marcoses. It exposes the excessiveness of Imelda and, well, the underlying things about Philippine politics, which, well, was more or less, or probably still is kind of heavily ruled by the Marcoses. So here's a trailer of the film.
When I became First Lady, it became demanding for me. I have to dress up and make myself more beautiful because the poor always looks for a star in the dark of the night.
I don't have an answer for why we allow Imelda to even open her mouth.
The best politician that I've ever seen is my mother.
Her big dream is to restore the greatness of the Marcos family.
It's scary if these people are brought to power again.
I was always criticized for being excessive, but that is mothering.
3,000 pairs of shoes.
Shipping animals from Africa.
Picasso.
Michelangelo.
The demonstrators stormed the gates of the palace to take back what they said was theirs.
There was a big reception. I had to wear jewelry. And we were told, get into the helicopter. So I put diamonds in diapers. It saved us later on to pay lawyers.
Imelda Marcos has gotten away with murder. That case remains unresolved.
Why will I do that? I had nothing against him, except that he talked too much anyway.
The Marcoses scrubbed clean the sins of the past.
Nobody said you can't do it. She came back. They found no skeletons, only beautiful shoes.
Little did we know they financed the election of Duterte, paving the way for Bongbong Marcos.
People were just taking it too easy, not believing that it was possible.
Like Trump, no one saw Trump coming.
People forget the mistakes of the past, are condemned to repeat them.
I want to mother not only the Philippines, but the world. Nobody can stop me. Perception is real, and the truth is not.
Nina, you may want, baka gusto mo mag-discuss more.
Okay. So The Kingmaker, it was a movie that was made a few years ago that showed how the Marcoses ruled the Philippines. So in the movie, what they did was they showed Imelda talking about how great the Philippines was, and then they would cut it in with clips and interviews from people who experienced the time and just exposed how bad it really was and how wrong Imelda and the Marcoses were. And an interesting thing in the movie is that when it starts, Imelda has this very, very lavish background with fancy furniture and fancy paintings. And by the end of the movie, it's very bare. It's so different from what was initially presented. So now she looks like she's one with the people. Like, so that she presented herself in a way that the people would relate to her more, in a sense. And that should remind us of another politician, our president nowadays, who does the same thing. He presents himself as one of the people. And we should also look at how the Marcoses and Duterte are similar, especially in their strongman politics, particularly the way that they use violence to assert their power. But before we go into that, let's look first into the circumstances of the country before the 2016 elections and during the 2016 elections. So at the time, the political climate seemed favorable for an opposition party because the people wanted change, and that is something Duterte promised to give. His motto was "Change is coming," if we all remember. So why did the people want change? First, there was Yolanda and how the relief goods weren't distributed properly. If I remember correctly, also at some point, like way after Yolanda, they found a warehouse filled with relief goods that were supposed to be distributed, but they weren't. Another issue was the tanimbala in Naiya and in Duterte. And there was also the elitism that the Aquinos portrayed. They had this air of being better than the people, that they were of higher position, that the people couldn't relate to them. And another issue is that one of drugs, which is one of the main things Duterte talked about during his campaign, if we all remember, and until now, it was made to look like an even bigger problem because there's this article by Mark Thompson called "How Duterte's Drug War Taps into the Philippines Zeitgeist." He writes that there was this show called Narcos during that time, and I watched it too, and it just showed how bad drugs can be, and it also showed in that show na sobrang corrupt ng political system that they enabled the drug cartels and drug gods to stay in power. And that is something Duterte was against. And the people were tired of drugs, and it was basically painted as a very big problem. And another problem that the people had was the lack of military support, particularly that of the SAF 44, which is a thing that is still being used to criticize the Aquino administration. The SAF 44, they were basically soldiers who were, it was a massacre, and the president didn't do anything about it. It could have been avoided. And there was also the building of American bases in the Philippines, which the people didn't like because America was already here. Why are we letting them back in? That's basically giving them more power. And also there is the Hacienda Luisita issue, wherein the farmers, they were supposed to gain ownership of the land that they had been farming for years and years and years. Pero that didn't happen, and until now they are still not the owners of the land. So that candidate, Duterte, at that time, he portrayed a very, very different persona from what the people were used to. It was very different from what Aquino had portrayed because he presented himself as one of the people. He dressed like the people. He spoke like the people. So, of course, they related to him, and they felt that that's one of us. He can lead us to a greater, better future. He had far better conviction than his other candidates as well because of the way he spoke. He seemed to speak very emotionally as well, with anger fueling his words, the same way that the Filipinos were angry at how the country was being run by the Aquinos. So in that time also, there was the film Heneral Luna. And when people watched it, people saw a Heneral Luna, a great leader, in Duterte. And the situation in the Philippines seemed to be very, very fitting because the Philippines then and now was a mess. And it seemed that Aquino was handing us over to the Americans. So it seemed like he was Aguinaldo giving us away to the Americans. And Luna was against that. And it seemed that Duterte was against that also. So if Erika, you want to continue?
Yes. So the film Heneral Luna was immensely popular at that time, and it seemed to encapsulate the situation of the country then, with Duterte as like kind of appearing to be the most similar candidate to Luna because it was the season for elections then, like for the campaigns and all. And then I said before, as you've said, Aquino was seen as a weakling and did a lot of politicking or use of clansmen. Like, addition lang dun sa issue ng Yolanda kanina because na actually ay nakasira rin nun kay Mar Rojas who also ran for the presidency. May record doon na kasi yung mayor nun sa one of the places affected by Yolanda is Rojas was said that Marcos ang Romualdez ka, Aquino ang nakaupo. So like there was a politicking even sa goods na kahit na kailangan na ng tao, tapos parang haharangan mo pa. And kahit na sabihin natin si Rojas is a separate person or entity from Aquino, parang it was still viewed as something na under Aquino and was allowed by Aquino because Rojas was under him or like a clansman of Aquino. And then andun din kasi yung parang issue na dahil parang first bachelor president si Aquino noon, and he wasn't really parang that manly man na as most say politicians back then, even mostly presidents then would appear like he didn't look like he had strong convictions. Like as what I heard from older people, he was malamya and parang in a way para raw bading, which actually kung para sa atin it's not really an insult much na, pero in the eyes of the general society it's like an insult, especially for given his age and position and power. Tapos yun nga, as said before na yun yung time na parang mas nakikita na bumabalik yung Americans, and yung sa time din ni Luna is yung fight against Americans na yun yung time na talagang kaka-release lang natin from the Spaniards, and then andyan na naman may bago na naman kaaway na Americans na pinipilit na kunin yung kung ano yung parang pinaglaban natin na kasarilan na nun. Tapos yun nga, yung parang sumikat din nun yung mga dilawan kayo, gano'n na ginamit nun sa campaign ni Duterte kasi parang pang against yon na yung mga dilawan daw is parang sobrang mga bad na parang tuta lang ng gobyerno o gano'n. Meanwhile, Duterte and his supporters were like, kami yung parang fighters na kaya makipaglaban para sa ikabubuti ng bansa, while yung mga dalawa is like mga parang clansmen lang din na katulad nga nung kay Aguinaldo noon na parang mas pinifavor niya talaga yung royal, parang not royal pero like yung mga noble families na para mapapakinabangan niya, and then na mas pinifavor niya rin doon obviously yung Cavite over other places na like Caloocan, which was handled by Bonifacio. Like mas pinifavor niya yung Cavite because that's where he came from, and he chose most people in power. He placed most people in power. The people he placed in power were mostly yung mga parang kakampi niya rin or kakampi like mga under him, and sobrang evident ng nepotism doon nung time niya, because you would not get promoted because of your parang capabilities, but most likely you would be parang promoted and such or appointed if you have parang the right family to support you or to back you up. And parang nung time ni Aquino, parang ganun din yung nakita ng mga tao. And it was kind of used against him then because parang ang dating, sila lang din naman yung namumuno. And yun nga yung tagline ni Duterte na change is coming. So he was like presenting the idea na babago na lahat. I think another factor that came in dun sa change is coming is the fact na siya yung first president to actually, candidate siya noon na parang never pa nagkaroon ng president na not from Luzon. I'm not exactly sure if meron na nanggaling sa Visayas, but you should, parang wala pang talaga strong candidate coming from Mindanao. So it was actually a huge parang turnover because aminin man natin or hindi, the Philippines is like very Luzon or Metro Manila centric. And then, so yung similarity niya doon kay Luna is like, because Luna was someone with a very strong conviction na like meron ngang clips dun sa film na mapapakita na sobrang against siya. Not against siya sa parang politicking. And like, may part na sinabi niya, walang nakakaangat sa batas kahit ang presidente. From there, yun nga, here, si Heneral Luna naman nung time nung ni Aguinaldo was like, again, sobrang against niya sa politicking, and he was too firm and strong on his convictions na kailangan magawa natin lahat para mapaalis ang mga Amerikano. Yun ang importante. Bakit? Pero yung mga like other officials noon na sa table, yung mga other officials sa table na kasama nila ay parang may mga kanya-kanya rin silang intention na more on personal, na parang bumabalimbing sila sa Amerikano because it will benefit them. And there came the phrase na tanong ni Luna, is it bayan or sarili? And people kind of saw that in Duterte na kasi pareho sila ng parang in a way na sobrang strong nung dating, and like they were both leaders na sabihin natin going against the current admin, like parang they're like no nonsense people na I don't care what you say, basta this is what I know is right and this is what I will do and this is what I will make my people do. So, and Duterte really seemed like a man or a leader with like Luna. Tapos dagdag mo pa yung testimonies nun of the Baweños about his leadership and his down-to-earth personality. And I can remember some na nagsabi pa na he was really that parang tatay-ish, or well, that tatay-ish part may not be Luna-like, pero parang parang he was that dedicated or passionate about maintaining order, yung discipline and order dun sa city, sa Davao, because he was parang, there were times na he was acting like a taxi driver, so parang he can keep other people in check, and even parang yung mga turista na syempre hindi rin siya gaano kilala at that time. So that was the parang kind of good side that was seen by the people na Duterte had Luna in him. Although what was said that is that yung si Jerrold Tarog, which was the director, said na yung what will the people see or interpret, take away from the film will not necessarily be in his control. Parang I just give this, but it's up to the people how they see it as. And sakto nga nung time na yon, andun si Duterte na parang si Luna.
Yes.
Although yun nga, sinabi rin niya na wala naman talagang sinusuportahan yung sa Heneral Luna film. Siguro parang nagkataon lang din. So to further discuss yung naging response ng tao is
first we'll look into what Jerrold Tarog actually said during the 2016 elections, because even then people were already drawing comparisons between Heneral Luna in the film and Duterte who was running for president at that time. he said in an official Facebook post that there was no modern day Luna amongst the candidates running for president at the time. And we have to acknowledge that Luna lived in a different time and place than today. We have to acknowledge that the only similar thing we have now is the betrayal and divisiveness, which is emphasized in the film. Looking for an Antonia Luna or some candidate with Luna-like traits should also come with acknowledging the flaws that Luna had and that the candidate may have, which we will go into more later on. Jerrold Tarog also says that I quote, your candidates will never be your saviors. He says that during election seasons because nobody, not like, it doesn't take one person to transform a country and like maglalagay ka pa ng deadline na 3 to 6 months, the drugs. And leaders should inspire people, and people should not fall for leaders who say na they can just sit down and relax and the leaders will be bahala na to everything, which is something Duterte showed. Because real life isn't a movie. And Jerrold Tarog also asks in that post na the people should think about their votes and their candidates and acknowledge their strengths and their flaws. And now we'll go on to the comparison of Luna and Duterte. I'll focus on how the Luna in the film and not the real life Luna. Erika will go into that later on, but I'll be focusing on how Heneral Luna was portrayed in the film and compare that with Duterte. So Luna in the film, he was he portrayed a strongman kind of figure. He seemed very authoritarian. He swore a lot. He seemed like one of the people, but his weakness and downfall was that authoritarian attitude that he held as well. And one thing Luna had was that he had people to keep him in check, such as si Paco Roman ba yun? When Luna was about to shoot the chicken vendor, Paco Roman was like, hey, no, don't do that. He tried to stop Luna from doing that. And Duterte naman during election season, by the way, he also portrayed a similar image, very strongman, swearing, looked like the people, sounded like the people. His platform was very different from the others as well. He focused more on drugs, like the 3 to 6 months, and the drug problem will end. And his support was also very rabid in the sense that the people already thought that it's us against everyone else, and everyone else was considered dilawan if you didn't support Duterte. And I mentioned that Luna had people to keep him in check, right? Duterte naman, parang what he has is yes men, basically people who enable all the bad things that he does. So while one is bayan over sarili, which is Luna, and that's also one reason why he died, because he chose the nation over himself. The other is sarili and cronies over the actual nation. That's why he's still here for some reason. But first, let's go into how Luna actually was during, like, the real Luna, not the movie Luna. So, Erika, please.
Yung pinagbasihan ng film na Heneral Luna by Jerrold Tarog was yung A Question of Heroes by Nick Joaquin, and that will be our basis then for discussing Luna's personality, feats, achievements, and weaknesses or downfall. So Luna was actually a scientist. So, and he was self-learned in military science. So, and was considered a master tactician. Like yung kung napapansin niyo sa film, and usual siya pag like sa mga military, magaling siya gumawa ng parang plans and formations para dun sa mga troops. And like ang sad part lang dun is like they didn't listen to him kahit na maayos yung, as in sobrang feasible ng mga ginagawa niya. One thing is that yun nga, dahil sa pagiging masyado niyang authoritarian and like hindi niya kaya parang how do you say this? Para mamlastic ba? Para ma-push through yung kung ano yung gusto niya mangyari. And ang one reason kasi doon, parang doon sa formation thing, is it was parang to safekeep na talaga yung mga soldiers doon. Kaya hindi rin siya parang tinugunan nung mga other high-ranking officials aside from doon sa, yun nga, kulang siya sa politicking, is that parang mas ina-emphasize nila na mas gusto nila lumaban and parang with all of them na parang hindi shielded by anything, which was kind of questionable. Pero parang sa kanila is like giving parang ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo, na parang masyado na lang nire-romanticize yun when like you guys cannot die naman. And if you don't die, parang mas mapapatagal pa yung laban, and like you get to live in general. Kasi para saan pa yung pinaglalaban nyo, diba? Kung like mauubos din naman yung tao. So yun nga, as discussed na rin kanina, yung main weakness ni Luna, which na na rin naman sa film, is that sobrang hindi niya kaya lumaro sa Agos, na tipo na yung sobrang init agad ng ulo niya, and like kapag may ayaw or like sobrang against, parang absurd para sa kanya, he cannot control his temper or like kind of think of other ways or compromise. Parang he's such a no-nonsense person, which actually people saw rin in Duterte. And then yung contrast naman nung kay Luna, na yung kinamatay niya is yung lack of political ambition. Kay Duterte naman, it's kind of what's keeping him alive, kahit na honestly mukhang sobrang na niya.
Yep.
I don't wanna say basta para mukha na siyang
he looks like he's dying. Let's just say it.
Yeah. Okay, yun. Mukha na siyang naagnas.
Okay, so we've already talked about how not Luna-like Duterte is, and the failed promises that Duterte has. But also, one thing that was mentioned earlier was the nepotism, and by that we should also look at how the Dutertes practice nepotism. They've been in the mayor and vice mayor positions in Davao for how many years now, and now they also want to continue their
run for national.
Please, no, because that does
this
not
yeah. Hello. Ayan. So tas rin, like dinala niya rin dito sa parang national level sina Bato, sina Bongo. So that's another nepotism. And like yung sa generals din pala, because he appoints people,
other strongmen-like people in power, such as military men who know nothing about running the country. Example would be sa healthcare and with the pandemic response. He appointed generals and military people into power, into like healthcare-related positions. Like example, here in Baguio, our mayor, who is a former general, is our contact tracing czar. Like, what does he know about contact tracing? All I know is that our mayor is very strongman like din, because he gets very angry at anyone who opposes his views and whatever. And that's the same with a lot of the people in government Duterte has appointed. Yeah.
Tapos sorry.
Go lang.
Yung ano rin pala, because yung sa issue nga ni Aquino is yung sa military, 'di ba? Lack of military support. Doon naman parang bumawi talaga si Duterte, which is actually pretty smart din talaga sa kanya if he wants to stay in power, because the military is basically the stronghold or the protection ng president. Kasi if since he was giving so much money to the police and the military, parang people within those within those para sectors won't turn against him kasi they're benefiting from him eh. So parang another kind of nepotism in a way. And parang dagdag ko lang kasi parang iwas din yun sa kudeta. Baka pero in a way yun yung na-prevent ni Duterte para sa kanya kahit na sobrang dami ng rason para parang i-oust siya. Pero yun nga dahil nasa kanya ang parang backed up siya by military so he won't get ousted.
Yeah. So you can see how not like Luna he actually is, but he's more of an aguinaldo. He's really a traitor to the people, a traitor to the nation. He's angry at the Americans, but as you mentioned, we're China's lapdog now. He promised to jet ski in the Philippine Sea, but what's come to that? Like nothing's happening. He just basically sold us to, like more or less, he sold us to another country for what? And
for his own benefit.
Tama. Like he's not Luna in any sense. The image that he showed during election season is nowhere to be found. Every day, more and more people see him for what he really is, which is a king and a coward and very Aguinaldo-like and not Luna-like.
Ayan. It's a COVID issue.
Yeah. I think this pandemic really exposed how the strongman politics and strongman politics really doesn't work, because strongman politics really use violence and anger to fuel their something, to fuel themselves, basically to fuel themselves and to fuel their agendas. But why are you going to respond to a pandemic with violence and anger, which is what we've seen with Duterte? Like it's the people who are constantly blamed for the outbreaks. Like yan kasi we don't stay home. People
Matigas ulo.
But really, we should trace it back to the government, because it started with them. Their anger goes nowhere. Their anger should be at themselves and not the people, because first of all, we should have closed borders dati pa.
Yun. Kasi they were afraid to hurt China's feelings. Tapos nung later on naman, biglang yung China naman yung parang nagko-close ng borders for Filipinos.
Yes.
And then yung another issue with the military, nung mga simula pa lang is ang ginagawa nila is like naglalagay sila ng mga checkpoints and such. Like kaya 'di ba yung slogan na solusyong medical, hindi militar.
Oh girl, hanggang ngayon, please.
Yeah.
Yes. So they're used to putting basically people who embody the strongmen, such as military people, in positions where they shouldn't be in, such as healthcare positions. And that's something the people are angry at. But ayun nga, because all the strongmen anger and violence, any sort of criticism that the people have against them, they're going to explode at that and silence any critics they have.
Yeah. Anger can only parang do so much, but more on destroy so much.
Yes.
And then I think you want to discuss about Miriam Santiago.
Oh, okay. While we're talking about strongmen and strongman politics, you also have to acknowledge how many strongmen there are now. First of all would be our favorite, China's Xi Jinping, because he promised also a new era of strongmen who overrode the democratic constraints, and very, very recently, wala nang limit sa term niya, so he can just keep ruling as long as he wants. And another would be Thailand, where there was a military coup in 2014. So basically, it's Ayun nga, people with anger problems and whose only solutions are violence. It took over Thailand, and very recently that also happened in Myanmar. So if we want to look during the 2016 elections also, we had another candidate. Her name was Miriam Santiago. She also had some strongman-like qualities, particularly her being very no-nonsense, very straight to the point. If we're going to look at that from a... And she didn't win, and we all know that. Maybe we can... from a feminist perspective, one could say it's because she's a woman, so the people didn't view her as strong as Duterte, but also she was sick at that time, so that also made her lose votes. But also people looked up to her because of those strong man-like qualities, such as being like she swore a lot, if I remember, and she was very, very straightforward and seemed very angry in her speeches as well, very
more
full of
on direct,
conviction. Yeah, direct. So
especially in Senate hearings.
yeah, the people admired that as well. And but the thing is, she had Bongbong Marcos as her vice president. So ayun, Erika, if you wanna continue on anything.
Tapos rin, I think another scary thing na is napansin ko lang na yung last World War, diba, is World War II.
Yes.
It was before Queen Elizabeth was reigned as parang ito na yung part na parang like yung ruling of men and women. Parang so far wala pang nangyayari World War III na sana wala naman. Parang I'm kind of scared na pag later on mag-iba na yung ruler kasi I know na malakas, I mean as far as I think or I know, malakas ang parang say ng British monarchy, not the monarchy itself per se, but I think malakas ang reason din na hindi natutuloy yung parang World War III is because si Queen Elizabeth pa yung parang nagro-rule. So like, and as far as we know is not to be parang prejudiced against men, pero mas more on may tendency mag-go all out into war kapag
tama.
Like,
very emotional.
Yeah. They claim na emotional ang babae, but they're actually more emotional pero more violent na emotional of some sort.
Yeah, they're violent. That they silence any critics against themselves.
Yeah.
Speaking of like silencing critics, there is social media censorship, such as there was one of the descendants of Jose Rizal, and they were supposed to name a ship after Jose Rizal, but first, before naming the ship, they ran a background check on all of the descendants who were supposed to attend the naming of the ship. And one of those descendants, his name is Jerrold Tarog. He's a photographer. He's very, very, very vocal about his dismay against the government, and they told him that he should delete all those posts. So censorship. So all the angry government people know is to silence their opponents. Erika?
Yes, so as he said, it's kind of an irony that you want me to be politically impartial when in fact the person that you're naming your ship after was not impartial to the social issues at that time. So just because na foreigner yung time na yon, like colonizers, ay parang it does not make it any different sa situation now na kapwa Pilipino yung parang tumutulig sa or kumakalaban sa kapwa rin Filipino. And then I think another thing is that yung may connect na natin to dun sa image, yung how image can be really dangerous kasi parang dito sa case naman nito, nung sa pag-inaugurate in the name, nung ship na in-name after Rizal, is like, it's kind of disgusting-ish na they're just using the name of Rizal for their own good. Like, it's becoming a tool for manipulation na. But they're not really respecting the parang more deeper meaning of parang what Rizal fought for. Like, kaya parang ano rin, napaisip din ako, napabalik dun sa sinabi ni Heneral Rizal naman. So, kung ano naman ngayon, Pepe, kung naging bayani ka, like it kinda revert back to that, yung dahil nga sa nangyari na yan na they were naming a ship after Rizal, but they wanted the descendants of Rizal to keep mum about the issues maybe they are a part of, diba?
Yeah. To maybe tie everything up, we look at two quotes from that Jerrold Tarog said. First would be, walang nakaangat sa batas kahit na presidente, which should be a reminder to our dear President Duterte that you are not above the law. You work for the people. Your anger and your violence should not have any excuse, and you should be held accountable for all the things that you did under this guise of being a strongman leader.
Yes, and for the people then to be reminded na they should not let themselves be lorded over by those kind of people.
Tama.
Power is still in the people.
You should remember that it is us who brought these leaders into power, and that we should always hold them accountable for what they did. The second quote would be, because if you're still looking for a hero outside of yourself, we continue to fail as a nation, which is very, very Rizal-like, I think, because we all have a Rizal, we all have the capability to change a nation. Maybe if we just come together and oust Duterte. Ayun. Because the heroes, our heroes aren't, we shouldn't look to one person to just save ourselves.
Yes.
We have the capability.
It should be a collective.
It should be a collective. It should be individual. We shouldn't just look to somebody on earth. I think that ends our podcast on talking about the strongman leaders, from Marcos to Luna, who was a leader in the military, and to Duterte, with a few mentions of strongman leaders from other nations as well. We just want to say that anger and violence and strongman politics will never ever be a good thing, I think. Yeah, never be a solution to the problems that we have.